All right, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and get started. First of all, who says this community isn't resourceful? This was the one session that was not in the booklet, and it's during lunch. So thanks for making it here and finding your way into this room. My name is Michael Brickman. I am Senior Advisor in the Office of the Undersecretary at the U.S. Department of Education, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk about a new experiment that we are considering as part of the Experimental Sites Initiative. Before I go into the details, I just have to have one big caveat, which is that what happens in Reno stays in Reno. This is a proposal. We want to give you all the first look at what we're thinking, but by no means is any of this permanent. What is actually part of the experiment will be published in the Federal Register, we hope in the coming weeks. So please stay tuned on that. I also want to just thank a few people who have helped bring this to where it is. First and foremost, my boss, Diane Jones, who's been extremely supportive and has shared a lot of knowledge to help simplify this and make it something I think is going to be a really great opportunity for institutions across the country. Also to folks in the Office of Post-Secondary Education who aren't here, but John Houston in particular has shared his expertise from the Hill. Our staff at the General Counsel's Office has been extremely supportive and has helped us tie up a lot of loose ends and make sure we're doing this right. So thank you to them, as well as to the FSA staff, Mark, Craig, Cynthia, Ian, Dave, and I know there's been said a lot this week, but this is yet another thing that Jeff Appel had a hand in, so thank you to the FSA staff. We really couldn't do it without you. So let's get into it. This is a new potential experiment, and if you don't know what an experiment is, it's part of the Experimental Sites Initiative, which is an authority given to the department under the Higher Education Act for us to provide limited waivers to a limited number of institutions so we can experiment and learn from new ideas and see if they work, not just on paper, not just in the Department of Education's building and in our own minds, but does it actually work on the ground with real people, real students? And it's probably good that we find that out before we go full scale and enact it into a change in regulation or in statute. A brief list of the experiments that are ongoing, and as I think has been mentioned in other sessions this week, several experiments will be concluded very shortly, and those institutions that are participating in those experiments have been notified. I also want to highlight the new experiments. We have the Federal Work Study experiment, which has had a couple of sessions this week, as well as the Second Chance Pell experiment, which we are expanding. And just a plug on those, I know there's a lot of interest from the schools that applied. We got a lot of schools, a lot of interest from institutions around the country on those. We're doing our best to go through that information as quickly as possible, tie up a few loose ends with the eventual evaluation, and get back to schools as soon as possible. And one other note on the experiments we'll be concluding, we're doing that because these experiments in many cases have been around for a number of years. We've gotten the data we feel like we can, and these are also experiments with very few institutions that signed up in the first place or that remain. Some of these experiments have institutions who fall off over a number of years, and so we want to make sure we're devoting our resources to the experiments that we still feel like we can learn something from and from these new experiments. So before I get into the details of what this experiment will be about, I want to talk about the financial aid system in general. And I think there may be a diversity of opinions around this room and around the country about whether the financial aid system is serving the vast majority of students really, really well, or only some students really, really well. But I think what we can all agree on is that there are opportunities for improvement. There are ways that we can do things differently to serve those students, however large they are in number, serve them better so that we can provide better outcomes after graduation, more opportunities for success, and hopefully less debt. Speaking of debt, there is $1.6 trillion in outstanding student debt across the country. These numbers might be a little bit different than the numbers you're accustomed to because these are numbers from the Federal Reserve, which cover FFEL, direct loans, Perkins, and some private loans as well. So it's a large number. It's a lot of people around this country who are impacted by this and are holding off starting a family, buying a house, and making a number of other decisions because of this debt hanging over their head. This is from the Brookings Institution. They estimate that students who first borrowed in 2004, 38% of them will default by 2023. I think that's an indication that for at least a very sizable number of students, the system might not be working well for them. And another important stakeholder, of course, are the taxpayers who fund these programs. There's an estimate from the Manhattan Institute that nearly half have made no principal payments 5 years after graduating. Of course, these loans come with interest you have to pay down and principal. If you're not paying down the principal, your balance is growing. And so that's not a good outcome for the student. It's not a good outcome for the taxpayer. And even though we do have income-based repayment and some other programs that can help, if the balance is still growing, you can still end up with uncertainty in the future, and you might end up with a large tax liability at the end of your obligation. Business leaders. They're the ones who benefit from the value that higher education provides to students. I'm not somebody who believes that every program has to be a vocational program. I'm a liberal arts graduate. I think liberal arts programs are fantastic. But while liberal arts programs might prepare you for your 5th job or your 10th job, we also need to make sure that graduates are being prepared for their first job when they graduate. And so hopefully they have not only critical thinking skills, not only the numerous other benefits that you get from a liberal arts education, but hopefully they're able to get some hard skills that can prepare them for a job when they graduate, and we can give this number a little bit higher. Because of the number I just showed you, it's not surprising to see this number, which is the percentage of American adults who would change either what they studied, where they studied it, or the type of degree they got. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that once students graduate, they end up in the workforce wishing that they had some different skills. And I'll be honest, I'll raise my hand on this one too. I really enjoyed my education, but would have been nice to have gotten more coding skills, more business skills, some other things that would translate into some of the things that I've wanted to do after graduation and have had to go out and get on my own after the fact. So let's get into the experiment. Let's talk about some of the ways that I think we can address some of these challenges. We want to learn through this experiment whether, if we give institutions some limited waivers, if we give them the tools to responsibly limit borrowing, can they be better partners for the students that they serve? And can they help be on the same team with the students, not just when they're in school, but after they graduate? So we know this is something that institutions have been asking for a long time, this ability to more holistically limit borrowing. That's something that I think we'll be able to do through this experiment. There's also a lot of discussion today about being able to finance not just programs that are currently eligible for Title IV, but also, like I mentioned, programs that are workforce related and that can prepare students for what comes next. So there are 2 waivers that I think we can offer, and we're going to keep it simple. These are not earth-shattering waivers, and in fact, the first waiver is something that is part of an existing experimental site, the limiting unsub loan experiment, which many of you may be familiar with, allows institutions to limit unsub Stafford loans. We would go further, and the reason is because, first, we didn't get the uptake I think we initially thought on that experiment. There are a small number of institutions that are participating. We still hear from institutions constantly that they're looking for more flexibility in this area. And we have a tool today that we never had before, and that's the program level data on the College Scorecard that will allow institutions to make more informed decisions about whether and to what extent borrowing could be limited. So that's the first waiver. The second is about repaying loans. Now, I know this is something that institutions to some extent do already. Many law schools do this. Many institutions provide incentive-based institutional aid, but there's always this threat that this provision in the HEA, which says if you are paying off a student's loans in order to avoid default, you will be counted against your cohort default rate calculation for that student. It's something that is not always triggered, but in some cases it is, and worse, in many cases there are institutions that don't do this type of thing because they're worried about this provision. And so we would offer this waiver as well. I mentioned 2 waivers. We think there are 3 different ways that institutions would be able to participate. The first is by using that first waiver to limit borrowing. The second is to use the second waiver to repay loans on behalf of students. And the third, and this is the part that's most interesting, I think, is to use both waivers to create an institutional financing option designed by an institution, not designed by the federal government, but managed by the institutions themselves. I'm going to go through each of these in order, starting with limiting borrowing. Again, this is a waiver that would allow institutions to limit both subsidized and unsubsidized Stafford loans as well as PLUS loans to ensure that students are not taking out more than they can afford. And I think that's really important when we get into these institutional financing programs. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We wouldn't allow wholesale limits. We would have some restrictions. I mentioned the College Scorecard. We think that can be a valuable tool for institutions to limit borrowing program by program. We also could see borrowing limited by degree or certificate, and also think it's appropriate to have different limits for a freshman English major versus a junior engineering major, for example. And this is not a complete list. Again, look out for the Federal Register notice where we'll provide the full details about exactly what we're thinking in terms of the limits that would be allowed, but it's also important to talk about the limits on borrowing that would not be allowed. We would not allow what's sometimes called redlining. We would not allow anything that even gets near discrimination. And we want to make sure that even though those tools to look at things like credit score, family income are available to the private sector, that's not something that we're going to allow as part of this experiment. And we will also set some other restrictions to protect borrowers, protect students, which I'll talk about in just a second. The other waiver, as I mentioned, is repaying loans. We could see institutions using this to offer maybe a satisfaction guarantee. If a student comes in, isn't satisfied, rather than dealing with a drawn-out complaint process, you could make them whole and let them go on to another institution. We also could see incentive-type programs. So if a student overcomes that freshman year hump, makes it to the sophomore, you might want to offer some incentives. And those incentives could come after graduation as well. So those are the types of things that we could see with this waiver. But again, we have some restrictions. We would not want to allow misuse of this waiver. There's a reason for the HEA provision, and so we would only waive it for institutions that are on stable ground financially if they have had problems recently, not just in the last year, but in the last 3 years on their cohort default rate, if they're a proprietary institution and have had problems recently on 90/10, or if they have had problems with their composite score, or a number of other provisions that tell us this is not a financially stable institution. We would not let the institution participate at all because we want to make sure that a limited number of institutions who are really doing this for the right reasons and are focused on this program, not focused on getting their house in order, are the ones who are participating in this experiment. The third option, as I said, is to utilize both waivers to create an institutional financing option. So the way that would work is an institution could take the waiver to limit borrowing. They would repay the student's loan obligation from the federal government, and they would instead provide the student with an institutional financing option. Now, this option could be a low-interest loan, or it could be some other repayment that's based on a student's future earnings, such as an insurance product or an income share agreement. We want to leave the design of those programs up to the institution and give as much flexibility as possible so institutions can be creative and do what they do best, which is to serve their students. What we don't want to do is have these new institutional financing options become new federal financing options. There are already a number of options available to students. Those options would all be available to any student at any institution participating in this experiment. There's an important point. No student would be forced to take advantage of this option. This is just one more choice at an institution participating in this experiment. So the institution would repay us, and they could do that either as a lump sum or using the standard graduated or extended repayment. They could work with a third-party servicer because we know that institutions are not typically well-equipped to do some of this work themselves. They typically rely on others to help them out. We would allow that in this experiment. But we would make sure that the terms are fair to students, they're attractive to students, over and above what they already have offered through the direct loan program. And I'll talk in more detail about some of those protections for students in just a second. Just to diagram this up so it's a little bit more clear, hopefully. The way this would work is the department would sign a master promissory note with a student, as we always do. The student, though, would sign an agreement with their institution where the institution would agree to pay that funding back. Now, they could do this day one when the student walks in the door, but we understand that the institution could probably offer better, more attractive financing once the student has progressed a little bit through their program, has declared a major. The institution can then look at what the student is likely to earn and set pricing appropriately and probably give the student a better deal. So again, we would allow the institution to take over those loans either right away and then continue all the way through the program, or to wait until the student has progressed and then retroactively agree to take on all of the student's loan obligations. The third agreement would be the amended program participation agreement that we sign with institutions for any of our experimental sites to give you in writing assurance that you have the waivers we're promising. So those are the three different agreements that would set up this provision for students. A few other points. Institutions would be allowed to start small. We would not expect that an institution would do this for every single one of its programs right away. We understand you might have more data about certain programs. You might expect higher earnings at certain programs, and so we would be perfectly fine if you wanted to start even with just one program and then expand later on. The funds that an institution could use, so I'll come back to this in just one second, but the funds that an institution could use would be the direct loan funds, but then the institution could also contribute its own funds. And the way that would work is the institution, because they are taking on greater risk here in order to invest in their students, we would allow the institution to dial up or down the amount of federal funds versus institutional funds. As long as the student is able to pay for their program, that adjustment could be made program by program to determine what's appropriate. And I'll show you a few examples in just a second. But before I do that, I want to go back to this slide, which is really important, and it talks about protecting students. So, of course, we would use the HEA's provision to prevent discrimination based on race, national origin, religion, sex, marital status, age, or handicap status. Under no circumstances would that be allowed. And as I also mentioned, anything that even approaches that through redlining would also not be allowed. Any other federal or state laws that might apply to consumer credit would apply here. We would also require that institutions participating provide revised counseling that speaks not just to this program, but compares the benefits and drawbacks of this program to the direct loan program. In addition, students would retain through these institutional financing programs any deferment, forbearance, and discharge rights, and that includes if the institution closes. Again, we're only going to pick the most stable institutions here and the institutions that really are invested in this idea. But in the unlikely event that an institution closes, under no circumstances would the direct loan go back to the student. We would work with the institution to either pay off what the institution still owes the department in a lump sum, or if the institution closes precipitously, we would reserve the right to go after their assets as we do in other cases. We also would look at the specific provisions that are offered to students before we approve them. We would not allow anything that is unreasonable, anything that is seeming to go after students and charge unfair interest rates, unfair fees, or any other financing terms that the Secretary, at her full discretion, deems to be unfair. We would look at the market on what's already happening at the institutional level, on repayment that's based on earnings to ensure it's something that is aligned with what's already happening and is not going to give the student a worse deal than they might be able to get from the direct loan. But ultimately, the student is still empowered because, as I mentioned, they will always have the opportunity to choose a direct loan instead of this institutional financing option. Now, there are some people who would say, well, institutions are already doing this. They're already offering these institutional financing programs, so why do this experiment in the first place? And I think it's really important to note that a lot of these institutional financing options are offered as last dollar financing. They're offered in addition to federal loans. And one of the things we want to see, in addition to can institutions be a partner with a student, not just when they're in school, but after they graduate, but can they help finance all of a student's educational costs so they don't end up with these conflicting messages coming from different financial products, but they have one payment that they know they can afford and is going to be simple for them to understand. So we want to give the institutions the power, if they're going to offer something like this, to finance all of a student's educational costs while also ensuring that they're not taking out this institutional financing program and then also running up a lot of debt through direct loans. So a few different examples of how this might work. Let's take an English major who is provided direct loans, and let's say they borrow up to the cost of attendance. They borrow what they would otherwise borrow, but those direct loans don't cover the full cost of attendance, and this student would have to otherwise go out and get private loans, go out and put living expenses on their credit card, or even worse, go out to payday lenders. We want to make sure that the institution has the opportunity, if they wish, to fund all of their educational costs and, again, make all of it affordable for the student. Another example is an engineering program. An institution might say, we know our engineering program has high earnings. We would rather provide more of the funding ourselves and leave less coming from the federal government, so they could reduce the borrowing limits lower and provide, again, more of the institutional funds themselves. So just a note of where those institutional funds might come from. We know some institutions have large endowment funds, and that's great if you do. You can use those. But a lot of institutions do not, and that's why we think that providing this federal capital can be helpful. But we also know there are institutions that formerly participated in the Perkins Loan Program that might have leftover institutional funds that they'd want to use towards this. We know that there are workforce funds that institutions might want to provide, working with a partner that can fund things outside of the Title IV program. And so that third example on the bottom highlights that example, which is you might have some direct loan funds, you might have some institutional funds, and then you could work with a workforce board or some other investor in workforce programs. And the interesting thing here is that while the direct loan funds would have to go for direct loan Title IV purposes, the other funds could be used for other purposes. And so you could have, for example, this advanced manufacturing program that's offered by the institution, but supplement it with an apprenticeship. Or you could have a business major who's getting a bachelor's degree funded with Title IV funds, but then they also want to bundle in a coding boot camp so that they're marketable in Silicon Valley or in some other part of tech. There are a lot of other opportunities here for the institution, not just to partner with outside providers, but to utilize their really high quality offerings on their non-credit side and merge those together, offering a combination of direct loan funds, institutional funds, and again, providing a student with one affordable payment. Finally, we know not all programs result in a profession that is high earning. Education is a good example, and so we know that institutions have scholarship funds that they want to make go further. And so we know institutions are already creating what they call revolving funds or evergreen funds, where the institution asks for some money back on what they provided to the student, but they're not expecting to receive dollar for dollar back. They're not expecting to get 100% of the money back. But what this does, it allows the institution to support more students, to fund more programs, and perhaps to allow the high-earning fields to have the funds cycle back through and subsidize the programs for the students who are not expected to earn as much after they graduate. So those are just a handful of examples. We've been learning more and more as we've talked to institutions about this, and I think we'll get some creative ideas that we haven't even thought about and that aren't listed here. So we look forward to talking to institutions and hearing their ideas about what they would utilize these waivers for. Just to recap here a little bit, and then happy to take some Q&A. But again, I can't say this enough. This is institution-led innovation. We're providing a couple waivers from the federal government, but this is something that institutions are doing. They're leading these programs, they're designing these programs. We're just trying to give a little bit more flexibility for the institutions to do this so that they can better support the students they serve. We think that there will be taxpayer savings through this because if the institution is taking on greater risk, that means the risk is taken off of the taxpayer. I mentioned those default numbers earlier. It certainly is possible that an institution may close and we would have to go after those funds, but in most cases we expect, and the department has its ways of getting institutions to repay us, believe me, but the institution would, we think, repay at a higher level, and that should result in taxpayer savings once we actually start to get into repayment on these programs. The next one is really, really important, student peace of mind. Students often don't want to take out loans, not because they're scared of the dollar amount, but they're scared of what might happen if they lose their job, if they want to take some time off, if they end up underemployed, or if they just simply want to follow their passion and not always follow the money after they graduate. They're worried about the limitations on their choices. This provides greater flexibility. It provides greater peace of mind. I think that's something that will be really, really attractive to students who want to take advantage of this and, again, be able to finance all of their education with one affordable payment. This also allows institutions to explore new options to serve students better. I think I've said that a number of times, but we think this is really, really important as part of this experiment. I mentioned that institutions are taking on greater risk, and that's true. And, you know, institutions are often given a lot of the blame if students don't repay or if they don't have good outcomes after college. What this does is it says, we're going to actually give you the tools to do something about it and not just tie your hands and let others blame you if students aren't successful. So we think this changes the game in that regard, and it allows institutions to really innovate and do new things. Again, limiting the debt, that's a key component of that. And we also think that partnerships that can be built out of this, especially around workforce-related programs, can allow students to have what are sometimes called lifelong learning accounts, where you have one financing tool to fund all of the education that you need. And again, it's one payment that you understand that's affordable. I mentioned also the scholarship funds or the revolving or evergreen funds, so your institutional aid can be used to serve more students. That's another really important piece of this and something that we think institutions will utilize. Again, the full details will be in the Federal Register notice inviting letters of interest, but we wanted to provide this information now so you can start having some of the conversations on campus, can ask us questions, and provide some feedback if there are other things that we should be thinking about, because I'm sure you've thought of things just in this hour that we haven't thought about over the months that we've been trying to build this experiment. So we will have full contact information, specific directions, but we're hoping institutions can provide us, once this Federal Register notice is published, exactly what they're looking to do. I think I may have said this, but we do not have an expectation this is going to be a large number of institutions participating in this. We're looking for a handful of institutions that are really excited about this, that really want to do this well. There are other experiments where we're really just trying to collect as much data as possible from as many students as possible. I think this could end up being more of a qualitative assessment to understand the types of things that institutions would do with these waivers and the types of ways that they might serve students better if we give them a little bit more flexibility. And we hope that that could inform future regulatory changes, future reauthorizations of the Higher Education Act, and other flexibility potentially that the department can provide now. So stay tuned for the Federal Register notice. I'm providing my direct contact information here. I may live to regret that, but feel free to reach out if you have questions. I just ask if you have specific questions about could we do A, B, C, or D, please just wait until the Federal Register notice comes out. I think we will answer most of your questions that way, but if we don't, feel free to reach out. In the meantime, feel free to let us know if it's something that you think you might be interested in, and we'll start to tally up those names in addition to the schools that we've already heard from demanding these flexibilities, asking for different ways to serve students through financing. So with that, I will leave it there, and I'm happy to take any of your questions. So, thanks.
You want to go? All right. My name is Kylie. I have so many questions. I don't even know where to start with this program.
Great.
So first thing, when you say limited borrowing, how is that different than the professional judgment we already have authorized to limit borrowing from our students? And how does it overcome the challenges we face from our presidents, our deans of enrollment, our directors that say, no, it's going to impact our students more to limit the borrowing than to let them borrow, because that does impact those things.
Yeah, great question. And let me take the second piece first, which is, like all of our experimental sites, the truth is you have to have buy-in from your institutional leadership to be able to participate in this. We expect to get a letter from the president or the chancellor, or the other leader of the institution. And so we really don't want an institution to participate in this or any of our other experiments if there's not really true buy-in across the institution. We're happy to have those conversations with your leadership to help them understand this, but
my concern is more, I don't think you're going to be getting that from a lot of schools, like, honestly. And if this is going to become regulation, then that affects more than just your test schools. Do I agree with it personally? Go for it. Does my school? Hell no. Pardon the language. So that's the concern.
Yeah, no, and you know what? I agree. I don't think we're going to get a large number of institutions because unlike some of our other experiments where it's a simple waiver and they get additional flexibility and maybe even additional funds, this is different. This is asking institutions to really think differently about the way they offer these programs, and they're going to have partnerships and other things. So you're right. I think this will be a small number of institutions that participate. To answer your first question about the professional judgment, that's limited to a case-by-case basis, and we know that institutions are sometimes hesitant to do that at all because the department sometimes will come in after the fact and say, should you really have done this in this case? So we're providing you the waiver, we're providing you the ability to do something you can't do now, which is to limit borrowing at the program level or through some of the other subsets of students that we'll outline in the Federal Register notice.
So that leads to question number 2.
Okay.
So there were specific majors listed here. There were specific comments made about liberal arts educations. Where I stand doesn't matter, but the fact of the matter is that a lot more employers and entrepreneurs are looking for liberal arts majors.
Definitely.
Additionally, majors such as English and history, which mostly are those social sciences that you don't think anybody's going to earn money from, are most likely the students going to law school. So how do schools, or how do you anticipate schools being able to limit English majors when they might be the ones earning way more than your engineering students?
Yeah, you can't predict the future. I think you're right in general, and our program level scorecard data backs this up. A lot of liberal arts programs do extremely well in earnings after the fact. The only point I'm trying to make is that while long-term these students end up doing really well and their earnings increase over time, we also want to make sure they have the opportunity, not the requirement, but the opportunity to also supplement their education with something that's going to really allow them to hit the ground running in their first job.
So that's my last thing then. So this project to me sounds like we're taking the direct loan program and making it the school loan program. We're basically not eliminating any debt. We're just moving it off of the Department of Education onto the schools so that when we look at the numbers for debt, yeah, it goes down, but the amount of debt hanging on at the schools is increased. And there's really no benefit to your schools. We can't charge an interest rate more than what you would charge. You're asking the school to take on the risk. You're asking the schools to provide institutional loan funds, which we all already do. If we had loan funds, grants, scholarships hanging around, we would be giving those. I'm not sure where the extra institutional funds are supposed to be coming from. I don't see the benefit in our students. I do see the benefit for the Department of Education, but I don't see that how this is planning to reduce debt, which is kind of what was hinted at that this program is going to do. But I haven't seen any figures. I haven't seen any solution on how that is going to occur, because we're just moving the debt from the students through the Department of Education to the students through the school.
Okay, yeah, so a few points there. I think, first of all, if institutions are given greater flexibility and more tools to work with students to ensure that what they're borrowing is affordable, that can reduce debt. Secondly, this is, the terms are going to vary by institution. So the institution has to design something that's going to work for the institution and the students at that institution. The terms can also vary by program, and I think that provides a lot of opportunities to ensure that institutions are right-sizing the amount that's borrowed or taken out as part of an institutional financing program, right-sizing that to what the student can earn in the future. And finally, with regard to interest rates, there would be a limit. We wouldn't want to make a loan more attractive for the student, and so I could see loans more likely being these revolving scholarship funds, basically repurposing institutional aid to make it go further. But there are other options too that are not loans that institutions are already innovating with. We want to allow more institutions to do it, to serve more students, and to design programs that can finance all of a student's education, because we think there are some drawbacks if you have something that's not a loan and something that is a loan with conflicting terms and conflicting incentives. So I hope that answers your questions. I appreciate the skepticism, and I hope that most institutions will be skeptical. Again, we're looking for a small number of institutions that are already perhaps experimenting with some of this, or that have been wanting to do this but have lacked the waivers or have lacked the capital to do it. So thanks. All right, I think you were first, sorry.
Hi, Sandy Sarge, I'm with Sarge Advisors. So a couple of things, and I think I'm going to kind of expand a little bit on the last comment here. So first of all, a debt is a debt is a debt, and changing the name of it from DL to institutional from this perspective is different. It's still the general issue on collectability for this is that it's an uncollateralized debt. Essentially, if you're in mortgage banking, you've got the house. If you're in car loans, you've got the car. It's more like credit card debt, right? That's harder to collect. So we at the institutions already have a hard time collecting, even on the part that is our institutional debt. And we pay money to have third-party servicers help us on cohort default, i.e. collecting on your behalf. So, and because we're punished if that goes down. So I agree that we are missing, on the way it's presented, the issue is, it's not that who owns the debt or not, and I know Diane was shaking her head, so I'd like to know why she's shaking her head. But I think the issue is we are eye to eye with these students. So when we want to limit student borrowing, it's because we look them in the eye like we do our children and go, I don't think so. They're coming in with $100 jeans on and crying poverty. So we see that, you don't. So here would be maybe a different approach to think about. So the first thing would be look at cost of attendance calculations, and I know it's statutory, but you guys are with the government guys over there, so and according to General Brown, you maybe have some talking time, right? So number one on cost of attendance, get VA money put in there. Get any federal money, not just Title IV grant money, but any free money a student gets. I don't care if it's the Department of Interior gives some lumberjack a free education, go for it. But it comes off of needs so that I'm not getting double dipped with VA money and student loans. Okay, so that's number one. Thank you, yes. And all you have to do is literally cross out one word that says Title IV government funds. Yeah, Congress does. Okay, so
minor detail.
Yes, but let's bring it up and obviously point out, are you sure we really want people double dipping from every avenue, right? So the second thing would be I like the idea of being able to adjust your cost of attendance based on your degree. So for example, a freshman going off to college, across the country may really legitimately have all the things that are included in cost of attendance, like traveling home once or twice a year, things like that. A graduate student in a PhD program who's 45 years old, already owns a home, has 3 kids, is doing all that stuff, probably working, doing this on his own. Maybe we talk about his incremental cost of going back to school. So maybe he has more babysitting hours he has to pay for. He has travel time to the library, or he has to buy research equipment or a computer, but he probably doesn't need to fly across the country, see mom and dad. So allowing us that flexibility on cost of attendance maybe by degree, where it's incremental to what you're already doing. If you're going out for a master's degree, chances are, well, maybe not nowadays because the way the economy is, but let's say a PhD. You're in your 40s or 50s looking to do that, maybe your 30s. You're established somehow. Mom and dad have probably told you the buck has stopped, get out and go live somewhere else by that point. So think about things like that. Now, the only other thing I would say is, we have situations particularly in the state of California, and I think they're just leading the way, that new laws have been put in place that schools, and it's proprietary schools, they've literally pulled proprietary schools out and said, if you are not licensed as a loan servicer in California, and that includes, by California, they mean any student, if you're in the state, if you have a student you're out of that state, but you have a California student, so you can be in Michigan and you have a California student, you'd have to be a loan servicer. They can't leave school with institutional balance. Otherwise, we'd have to be licensed. So we've had to go out, our schools have had to go out and find a third-party servicer, i.e. adding cost to us, to be able to comply with that law. Because guess what? We don't want to be bankers. Schools, institutions do not want to be bankers any more than you guys want to be bankers. Well, guess what? In 2008 and 9, 80% of the private lenders went out of the business. Chase left. Morgan Stanley, like all these guys left the business because it's uncollectible, uncollateralized debt. So let's get back to the root problem and figure out what is it that we can do that would help it be a better risk for bankers to want to reinvest in our future. And one last comment I would make, for proprietary schools that are tax paying, pull some of that tax money out that we pay to the feds and put it into a reserve. If we're going to be demonized, then use our tax money to protect us later. Pull it out, put it into reserve, and we can tap into it when we have temporary issues, like maybe a problem with a composite score, or maybe borrower defense. We're paying taxes into the federal government and into our states. We're self-sustaining in that sense. Isolate some of that money across and build a reserve for bad debt coming off of this portfolio. Anyway, go Jeff.
All right, I'll give you a different perspective. My institution will apply. We're making income share agreement financing zero cost to some of our students. So a debt is not a debt unless you can afford to repay it in that situation. And just a suggestion or something to think about, if in the case where you might have an institution assume the direct loan responsibility, maybe consider removing that dollar amount from their 90-10 calculation. Jeff Arthur, ECPI University, East Coast Polytechnic Institute.
Thanks for all of that feedback, and just one thing to add, debt is not a debt if it's equity, and that's an important distinction between a loan and an income share agreement, so that's something to think about as well. Well, an institutional financing option could be either a low interest loan or something else like an ISA, so yeah.
Tyler Pruitt, I'm from Samuel Merritt University in Oakland. It's loud.
Sorry, the institutional name one more time?
Samuel Merritt University. We probably will apply as well. We're mostly graduate school, so there's not being, and I'm sorry I missed the presentation because I thought the topic was something else. Grad Plus is included in this, or is that?
Yes.
Okay. And then Title VII aid, probably not?
Probably not.
Okay. So we do a lot of nursing student loans, so. And then I noticed on the slide that as I was coming in, the benefits, you don't mention anything about this being an experiment and that the benefit would be to find out if this works or not.
Yeah, I think that's something that I talked about earlier with regard to all of our experiments, and you're right, this is something that we hope to learn from in order to inform what comes next, whether it's future regulatory changes, statutory changes. This allows us to do this in a controlled environment where we're watching closely and helping institutions along the way through technical assistance before it's something that's opened up to everybody. So again, I think this will be a small experiment where we really try to see if this is something that can work.
And I don't expect a school like mine will have much impact on the default rate. We're at less than 0.5% default right now, so we've been exploring ISAs, but we'll see. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, quick question. Kelsey Gerber, Loyola University Chicago. Our junior college or roommate would probably be interested in something like this, but I just want to ask a question about if they did something, think like a institutional teach grant where it could be forgivable. Will that affect subsidized loans if they were just trying to get rid of unsubsidized loans? Like, will that affect eligibility for that subsidy? Like outside scholarships and any free money does.
So would it affect the benefit? Like, would they lose the benefit? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, like where does that get awarded in the list of things? Like teach goes, above work study, above
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it may not be exact, especially if you're taking something that's a loan and turning it into something that's not a loan. So
Right.
it may be hard to draw direct lines between those benefits, but generally, and some of the benefits that I mentioned earlier around deferment in school would be something that we are expecting would be extended. In terms of, the actual dollar benefits that are extended, in general, I think our rule is fairness, and we would expect that students are being provided a good deal by their institution. I think there are a lot of students who may just want to do this because they'd rather work with their institution who they already chose and they already trust. But the expectation that we're going to have when we review your plans is that you're offering something that's a good deal for students and you're not gouging them. It doesn't sound like something that would be akin to a teach grant would do that, especially for a college of education, but we'll wait to see the details to find out for sure.
So if you're taking an unsubsidized loan and shifting that to something that's a subsidized loan or better, that will not affect the subsidized loan.
If you're providing a better deal, I don't think we would have a
Okay,
problem with it.
perfect. Thank you.
Hi, quick clarifying question. Jessica Thompson with the Institute for College Access and Success. Going back to your slide that had the triangles that talked about how a college might kind of change the mix of funds depending on the major, for example. We know that a lot of the schools that are experimenting with ISAs right now actually are looking at it as a potential revenue generating financing model, right, for the institution. For whatever purposes they might be interested in. So I just want to clarify here that when you talk about, for example, in the engineering major, then an institution might look at it and say, oh, I'm going to put more private sort of dollars in for the engineering major because my modeling shows essentially that the risk and the likelihood of a positive repayment outcome for that major is very low.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to just clarify that means what you're kind of thinking about here is that the institution looks at that and says, hey, I will actually get a better return and be able to keep it, as opposed to it being a federal loan where the federal government collects the interest.
So let me try to explain a little bit more and see if it answers your question. So the institution would be responsible for paying us back first. So the blue or the green part would have to be coming back to the federal government. The institution may see a greater return in some programs versus others. It's reasonable that an engineering program would see a more positive return on average than an education program on average. But as was mentioned by some other commenters, it varies on the individual. And individuals who happen to be part of one program take a lot of different paths after they graduate. And so the return for an individual, on some individuals, the institution may lose money. On some individuals, the student may make a little bit, but that's going to depend, especially if it's tied to earnings, it's going to depend on those earnings. So the students who have graduated and go work on Wall Street and are making a lot of money, yeah, they may have to pay a little bit more in as compared with someone who's teaching in a public school and is not making as much.
But then can you clarify a little bit what the assumption is about why this will save the federal government money if essentially what we're allowing institutions to do is to essentially privatize the healthiest borrowers and take them out of the federal loan portfolio?
So I'm not sure I'd agree with that characterization, but to try and answer your question, the savings, I believe, comes from the fact that while in theory the direct loan program is supposed to return funds to the government is supposed to make money off the direct loan program and has used that to fund other programs. That's not always what happens in reality, and so if students are not paying back as much as we thought they would, if the default rate is higher than we thought it would be, we're not going to make as much back. Our assumption in this is that an institution who's responsible for paying us back is going to have a higher repayment rate, a lower default rate than an individual student in the aggregate.
Thanks. Can I just clarify then that your assumption then is that for that the savings essentially are going to be assumed mostly through institutions lowering the amount borrowed by borrowers that they are predicting the future in terms of income streams down the line for? Because it seems like the engineering majors aren't your defaulters, right? So they're not the ones, when you mention like the borrowers that are, costing, for example, more than producing interest revenue for the federal government. As you show here, the institution's gonna essentially say, hey, I'm gonna give more of my money to them because then I get the positive return from their payments. But then that leaves in the direct loan program the people who may have higher rates of default. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what the theory is in terms of what the taxpayer savings are coming from.
Well, I think no matter how you slice the borrowers, the default rate is what it is. It may be, the students who participate in this experiment may not be 100% representative of the overall population, but the default rate is out there and it's still something we have to contend with. We think institutions repaying us rather than an individual student will drive that default rate much, much lower because, as I mentioned, and I think people in this room know this, the department has ways of getting paid by institutions. We generally make it happen. So in that way, I think the default rate will go down substantially, and that's regardless of what an institution or what a student ends up borrowing and whether it's more or less than they would borrow otherwise, because we're talking about whether they're paying us back at all, whether they're defaulting. So hopefully that answers your questions. I'm not sure who was next.
You were before me.
Well, I believe you. Sorry. So this isn't so much a question, it's just a suggestion of something to consider whenever you do get to the point of reviewing data and starting to collect data. So there's a good amount of research just showing that different groups and different populations of students gravitate towards certain majors based on their backgrounds, their cultures, their situations, and just thinking about ways that we might unintentionally sort of redline students, that would be probably something to consider, like, oh wait, are we prioritizing majors that maybe only richer students are studying, or maybe only native-born students are studying, or something like that. And I just think that might be, maybe you won't get enough data to really have a representative sample, but that might be something important to consider.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, we absolutely want to look at that. We want to do everything we can to ensure this is fair and is not in any way intentionally or otherwise discriminatory. So thanks.
Can you explain some different ways how the income share agreements work? Just a few different models that you've seen.
Just in general?
Yeah, in general.
Yeah. So this is something that a number of institutions are experimenting with as an alternative to loans. So again, it's often considered equity, not debt. There's not principal and interest. There is simply a set percentage of income that a student will pay over a predefined number of years, and usually that adjusts based on the cost of the program. So a lot of times this is done to pay the full cost of education at a non-Title IV coding boot camp, for example. I'm personally not aware of any program in which an ISA funds the entirety of a Title IV program. There are some programs where ISAs are provided as last dollar financing, or in particular, I think it's marketed as an alternative to PLUS loans, but not Stafford loans. And so, I think students tend to really like this because it provides certainty to them, and they know that no matter their circumstances after graduation, which can be really tough to predict if you're an 18-year-old going to college, going away for the first time, knowing where you're going to be, knowing how much money you're going to make and what that's really going to mean in terms of paying your bills can be really difficult. So having that certainty can be really helpful. The challenge is, as I said, the ISA typically is simply supplementing a loan, and so you end up with maybe the best of both worlds, maybe the worst of both worlds, depending on how you look at it, but you really have both payments that you have to make every month.
Okay, are payments made through like garnishing wages, or is it, how do you get their income data?
Yeah, so that has to be part of the agreement, and I think there's different ways that either the institutions or the servicers set this up, whether they're working with employers directly, whether it's simply a signed agreement that the student is going to provide their income data annually and provide payments typically monthly. So there are different ways to set it up, and I think, frankly, this is new enough that there's no one gold standard yet, and as this grows, there will probably be new ways that servicers and institutions and others figure out how to do this, but in short, as far as I know, it's basically an agreement where the student says, I'm going to tell you how much I'm making and pay you a percentage of that each month.
Okay, thanks.
I think with the evolution of the scorecard and the transparency, added levels of transparency that are there, and having tools like this available may introduce some more competitive factors than we may even be thinking about right now. And I'm not sure how that may all play out, but I think it's got the potential to not just be as simplistic as, oh, it's going to do this or that. I think it may introduce some dynamics that could potentially slow down tuition increases, possibly help adjust program costs more appropriately to the outcomes. And so I think there's a real potential here. And I think we're going down the right road. We just got to figure out how to make it work well, and experimental site, that makes a lot of sense. Let's see what we figure out.
Thank you. I totally agree, and this is something that, again, we want to learn from. That's the whole purpose of the Experimental Sites Initiative, is to try something that maybe is out there in small numbers. And I think whether you're talking about institutional financing programs, whether you're talking about risk sharing or skin in the game, that's being talked about a lot, funding these short-term workforce training programs, there are a lot of different ideas that we can get at here. And I think the one that personally I'm most interested in is something I think you just alluded to, which is if you give institutions more tools to work with the students that they serve, can they serve those students better? I hope the answer is yes, but this is what this experiment is designed to do.
I could think of some marketing strategies that may attract students to some lower cost pricing, so let's do it.
Do something, can you be, without giving away any trade secrets, can you give us like a general idea of how it works for ECPI?
The ISA is, for the way we're doing it, is so simple that it's just what it is. It's a payment plan with insurance, and it's as simple as that. And we're doing it at no cost. So whatever the gap is, or whatever the amount that they're financing, that's the most they'll pay. Period. No matter how long it takes, no financing costs. So that's the way we're approaching it on a limited basis right now.
So the other thing too is one of the things that the department has that we don't necessarily have is some of the stick, if you will, on collecting. So if a student defaults on a federal loan, then it's scarier ramifications, and we don't have those same sticks. So would the government consider looking at some sort of a guarantee or a recourse? Okay, so, right, so you're shifting the risk is what you're asking us to do. So tell me again help me understand, and maybe you can tell us why you were saying it's different than a loan. And here's the other thing is, the one advantage, like I've worked with a lot of parties in here that will take my loan, right? And they'll do the collecting of it, but I don't get the cash until the collection happens. One of the advantages and one of the things you need is you actually need cash to run a school. So we get the Title IV money at the beginning of the semester, and we manage our payroll and our rent and all of the things. If we had to depend on a student only when the student pays to get our cash flow in there, it would be very difficult, right, to run a school, unless you already had an endowment out there. So if you're a family-owned and you've got your house is collateralized, but you can't sell your house to pay your payroll, right? Because it's not a liquid asset that you could do. So I'm trying to think this through. Like, I like the idea of being part of an future income stream, but maybe it has to do with employers have to provide some of the guarantee, but they're the ones who are going to benefit in the future. I'm almost a conduit. The school is somewhat of a conduit to the ultimate benefit. The student and the employer are going to ultimately benefit from when they pass through us onward. But we have cash flow needs that the way DL and Pell work right now, we get that money up front and therefore can pay our bills in running the school. So come help us, Diane.
Since I've been asked 3 times, yes. I'll stand up. I hope everybody can hear. Can you hear over there? So I want to be honest and tell you that we're not designing this to help your school. I'm just going to be honest and tell you that's not the point. Thank you. But the reason that we are allowing somebody to roll a direct loan into an ISA is because in some instances you do need the upfront capital to come in from the direct loan. But you want to be able to give the student the option of rolling it into potentially an income share agreement so that the student isn't making 2 payments, which may be unmanageable. No, we're not going to collect. I mean, this is your relationship with your student and potentially with employers. But we also think that if you have an income share agreement and the ability to limit borrowing, like Jeff was saying, you may decide if you can limit borrowing, you can do this program for $6,000 instead of $17,000 a year. So, again, we're not here to solve the problems of the institutions. We're here to solve the problems of the student, which is the student who maybe is afraid to take a loan because they don't know what the outcome is going to be. This requires an institution to share that risk and say, no, if you come and learn with us, we're really committed to your long-term success, and we're so committed that you're actually going to pay us on the back end. Now, they get to have a direct loan that gets rolled in because we know some institutions need some upfront financing. To the question about engineering versus English, I mean, this was just an example of something that we've seen. We've heard from institutions that they will use their endowments to actually buy down the cost to the English major because the school values it and thinks this is important. And instead of giving a whole lot of scholarships up front to students who don't come back after the first year, what if you use your scholarship dollars to pay down the interest rate, or I'm sorry, not the interest rate, the payment rate or the number of years to say, you know what, we value education majors, we're going to buy down that debt, or we have donors that are going to buy down that debt. Or right, I mean, there's all kinds of arrangements out there. So the idea, and frankly, to be perfectly honest, the engineering students are probably the least likely to be interested in these programs because they're going to be better off with the loan, right? I mean, this is just an example. But we do think there's value to the liberal arts, and we do think institutions know it. And if you look at the Texas data, you know, the Texas system would be very wise to invest in their liberal arts students because their earnings outcomes are spectacular. So again, this isn't about trying to make it easier for the institution, and yeah, you have to service this. It is about trying to find new ways to allow institutions to reduce the cost or to cost the program so that it's similar to the earnings, so that you can guarantee some level of return on investment, so that you can work with your student populations who are afraid to take a loan and say, we've got another option. And so that the student who took a loan and now wants to look at a different kind of financing, you can buy that loan away from the student without it being counted as a default and give a student a new option. So I don't want anybody to think that we're going to apply this to everybody in this room or require it. I mean, this is an opportunity for those schools that want to think and try something new. It will not work for every school. It will not work for every student. It's an experiment to figure out, as Jeff said, what are the other options out there that we haven't even thought about? But we do believe, we believe this is going to drive costs down. We think when people are informed with the scorecard data and other kinds of financing options, we do think that schools will right-size the cost of programs to ensure an ROI that's reasonable for the student, and we think this facilitates that. And to your finally to your point about cost of attendance, yeah, if you're in an institution that doesn't have dorms and you want that to be the policy where you set your borrowing limits, here's your opportunity. Let's give it a try and see how it works. So, sorry, didn't mean to jump in,
No,
but
thank
you
you.
asked me 2 questions.
And one other point I think I can add is that the fact that we do give the institutions the option to either repay the direct loan portion as a lump sum or to do it on the standard repayment, extended or graduated, does give that flexibility to start to build up a program, and you're not having to pay back everything until the money starts to come in. So hopefully that helps a little bit. And one other thing is that you may notice we're not calling this, the ISA experiment or anything like that, because we are allowing loans, again, if they're low interest loans, there's a little bit more flexibility for other financing options like ISAs. But I think there may be a preconception of, oh, I know what an ISA is, but I don't think we've even scratched the surface of what an ISA could be. And so we want to ensure that we're being as broad as possible. And again, really, really underlining the fact that this is not a federal program. This is not a federal income share agreement. This is something that the institutions are designing and, as Diane said, taking responsibility for.
Garrick Hildebrand, UNT Dallas. So I have both a statement and a question. First off, an ISA is not equity. It is still debt. Regardless of what you want to call it, it's still a debt. Someone is borrowing money and agreeing to repay it, therefore it is debt. But my question is, through this proposed experiment, I mean, our institution, would like to be able to limit borrowing in a lot of cases. But one of the things that I have a big question on is, it seems like the institution or the department is encouraging institutions to shift the debt from the department to the institution and basically create an ISA with each one of the students participating in this. So why would the department want to encourage institutions to go this route and use an ISA, something that's still not clearly defined legally and something that's not even regulated?
Yeah, so first on debt and equity, I guess the reason I see it as equity, and I think a lot of people see it as equity, is because it's an investment in the student. You are, as the institution, investing in your students' future success. That sounds a lot more like equity to me. It also doesn't have principal, it doesn't have interest, it doesn't really even have a balance. It's a predefined amount of money that you're going to repay, like would be repaid through any kind of other a dividend or some other investment. So I do think it's more equity than debt. On the other question, again, this is an experiment. We are hoping to learn as much as we can from something that's new, but something that is widely talked about. This is not something I would personally advocate for being deployed to every school around the country, every student around the country. Again, this is something that we want to do on a limited basis to find out if institutions that are really eager to do this or maybe even doing this on a small scale already, can make this work for students in a way that allows them to finance all of their education, which, as I said, is not something that, to my knowledge, is happening through ISAs or similar tools today. And so I think that's just something else that we want to do to see if it can work while providing the proper protections to ensure that students are getting a good deal at the end of the day.
And I want to make one more point, because I think we've spent a lot of time talking about this new tool. There will be institutions that will only want to participate in the waiver for limiting borrowing, and they have no interest in participating in the other part of it. There may be institutions that only want to participate in a pay-for-success model where they want to buy down the loan. So there are institutions that may have no interest whatsoever in an income share agreement or an alternative financing mechanism. They just want the ability to experiment with limiting borrowing. And I want everybody in this room to understand, you do not need to be proposing a new financial tool to be eligible for the experiment. If the piece you want is limiting borrowing or repaying loans, or saying to a student that, you know what, if it doesn't work out and you really do want to go to another institution, we will wipe out your debt for you and let you start it with a clean slate. Or we will let you come back and we will wipe that debt out. So these two things are not linked. You do not have to be coming to us with a new financing model to take advantage of the other waivers. And if I had to bet my lunch money, I would bet that most of the schools who come into this experiment will be coming in for the limiting borrowing or the repayment opportunity, and not necessarily the new financing tool.
So I've been given the signal that we just have a couple minutes left, so I think
My
we'll
last
make this
question, it's
last
not
question.
even a question, it's just a suggestion. I know like limited borrowing is a very important topic. I wholeheartedly agree with it. I can't tell you how many students I want it to be like, no more, you're done. But for the love of God, can somebody please put a cap on how much graduate students can borrow in a PLUS loan? I know it would give the institution that, but it's very hard for an institution that's looking to grow a graduate program or have a solid reputation in their community to be able to say, you're it, that's done. It's hard for me as a person to be able to say, I'm sorry, you've got 3 kids and I need to judge how much you need to borrow. That's why I think something needs to come from the department, because I've seen graduate students with $750,000 in their Graduate Plus loans. So.
We are not allowed to make that change, but I think you've seen in our budget request, hoorah, we are with you on that.
I agree, I'm just saying you guys have more power than I do. So that is my biggest thing.
Thank you. All right, well, I think we'll leave it there today. Really appreciate it. Again, you have my contact information. Feel free to reach out, and we'll get that Federal Register notice out soon. Thanks.